So, in William O. Stevens' article about why a virtuous person would choose to be vegan or vegetarian, he starts off by explaining that this is not an argument for strict veganism, but an argument mainly focusing on abstaining from meat uh, from factory farms or meat from animals that are considered sentient species. And this includes most of our livestock animals, being cows, chickens, sheep, um, pigs, etc. Uh, it goes further by explaining that in this argument it's still considered virtuous to eat animal products that are not meat or eat species or animals that are not considered sentient. The first argument he gives is the argument for distributive justice, and he starts off by explaining that it is extremely inefficient to continue to use the system we have, where the amount of land and water and resources it takes to grow the same amount of food of livestock compared to crops is vastly different. It takes so many more resources, so much more land to grow livestock than it does for plants or for crops. And he goes further and says it's a shame because there's so many people who are suffering because they don't have enough nutrition or they don't have enough food, and we're perfectly capable of giving that, of having everyone be able to have enough food, have enough nutrients, be able to be healthy. And a critic this might say, well, obviously there are cultural implications to this, and how else are you gonna have cheap food without meat? Well, there's lots of food sources that are plant-based that you can get enough food or enough. You can get a lot of food really cheap. A good example of this is rice. Rice is a basis of a diet in many cultures, and rice is also really cheap. Second argument, the argument from environmental harm. He starts off by explaining that livestock produces a lot of pollution, whether that's the gases it releases into the atmosphere or the manure from the animals that gets into the land, into the water, which can begin drinking a lot of water and obviously have some negative health effects for human beings. A critic of this might say, well, growing field crops destroys habitats. Over-fertilization of crops pollutes too. And that's true. But at the same time, this argument falls apart because it takes more land to raise the same amount of food from livestock, you're destroying more habitats anyway. You're polluting more anyways. The third argument he brings up is the argument of the feminist argument from sexual politics. And he starts off by explaining that this is our cultural idea of that someone needs meat in order to be strong, and that the strong man is linked to. He gives several examples of this historically of men in power abusing the women around him, and he goes further and explains that this is a part of why there's this culture of violence in a lot of places around the world, and a culture of oppression. And a critic this might say, well, men have to be strong, men have to be able to protect people, and you need meat in order to do that. And you don't, because there's ways to get protein and nutrients from other sources that are plant-based. And also, this is a good argument to be able to put forth. Not a direct solution for obviously for violence in our country and around the world, but it could help by taking a different perspective, a different look at why we have these problems. The fourth argument is the argument for the moral consideration of animals, and this is what most people consider the obvious answer of why someone would be vegan or vegetarian, or is because they're worried about harming animals. And he goes through this and explains this through one of the perspectives he explains is through Tom Reagan's ideas about how they're conscious beings, and they are experiencing subjects of life, and because they can feel pain and joy and and they can suffer, and they can have the same basic emotional part of life that human beings have at its core level. Their needs and their well-being should be morally considered. A critic to this might say, well, a human life is worth significantly more than an animal's life. If you had to choose, would you rather kill a cow or a human? And most people would say, well, obviously would save the human because human life is worth more than the cow. But this argument falls apart because it's missing the point. You don't have to choose. In this argument, you don't have to choose because you can. In William O. Stevens, his argument is you can have both. You can have both the cow's life and the human's life. Because you don't have to kill the cow and you don't have to kill the human. You can rely on other food sources. The last one is also the last argument. The argument for health is another one people consider like an obvious reason for veganism, or why someone might be vegetarian or something along those lines. And it's because he gives a lot of examples for this culturally. People eating too much meat causes a lot of health problems. Some of the examples he gives is called heart disease, cancer, kidney problems, etc. Also, he goes into how, like, in our anatomy, the human intestines are much more similar to the intestines of herbivores compared to carnivores. But a critic to this might say, well, you need meat to survive. Maybe you can get enough protein from other food sources, but how are you going to get all the vitamins and minerals that you can't get without getting supplements? Is it not wrong because it's unnatural? This falls apart for several reasons, because just because something is unnatural doesn't mean that's necessarily bad. And another thing is, even though you have to take supplements now, in the future they could develop a food source that is plant-based or using animal products, or a diet that combines those things without eating meat from conscious animals, that you can get all those nutrients without having to take supplements. So you shouldn't just throw this away. And second of all, you can get almost everything you need from plant-based diet, and also eating animal products too. There's not a lot there that you're missing. And so the gap between like what's missing and what to be totally natural is not as important. And because in the future we could develop a food source that has all these nutrients and vitamins, it's worth giving this argument a shot. And because of these 5 reasons, this is why William O. Stevens is correct in saying that a 100% virtuous person would choose to be vegan or vegetarian. Thank you.